Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Maya Pelletier. I am the Education and Workforce Manager for the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center. And I'm super excited to be here today with Dr. Carrie Byron from UNE, the University of New England. And she's going to take us on a virtual field trip today of her lab spaces. And we're going to get to see a bunch of cool research that's happening. And we're going to talk about some of it. So I'm super excited. So, Carrie, could you introduce yourself to our wonderful audience?
Yeah, I'm happy to. My name's Carrie Byron. I'm an associate professor here at University of New England. And right now you're standing in the Gerard Marine Science Center. I'm going to show you a few of our lab spaces here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carrie. And so you're a marine scientist, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what exactly does that include? Like, what do you get to do for your job?
I get to have a lot of fun in my job.
Amazing.
And I work closely with students. Actually, it's my students who get to do all of the real fun work. So I'm an ecologist. I look at species interactions in the ocean and how all organisms are interacting in their different habitats. And most of what I do is applied to aquaculture or growing food in the ocean. And I know today we're here specifically to talk about seaweed. So I'm going to share with you some of the work that we're doing with seaweed and how that relates to aquaculture.
Amazing. That's so exciting. So to start out, before we get into talking about all that fun research stuff, can you tell us a little bit about what this room is and then maybe take us on a little tour of some of the lab facilities?
Happy to. So I don't know if any of you might be considering careers in science or in research, and I thought maybe it'd be helpful to see what some different lab spaces look like. And if you look around this room, it's kind of boring right now, right? There's a bunch of gray boxes sitting on the countertop, but each of these gray boxes has a different, very specific purpose and function and costs a lot of money, right? And so we use these different pieces of equipment to help us answer some of the questions that we have. For example, this one will rotate and shake and incubate everything at a certain temperature, right? And this is a centrifuge, so it spins test tubes really fast. And this is just simply a vent so that we can keep the air nice and clean while we work. Right over here, this is our fume hood. So if we work with any chemicals or things that produce gases or odors, we want to do it in here so those fumes get sucked up and out of the building instead of into our faces. Here we have a super hot oven. I have not tried making pizza in it yet, but don't recommend. A little oven for getting things really hot. And a freeze dryer. So this uses both cold temperatures and vacuum to sort of like dehydrate whatever we put in there. You've probably had some freeze dried candy. I heard Skittles are really hot right now, freeze dried Skittles or freeze dried fruits, right? And so that's done with a machine that looks like this. So lots of different pieces of equipment, and then, you know, just regular refrigerators and freezers as well.
So a lot of the things that you're actually able to do science with are things that people might see a different version of in their house.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
So,
I can show you a few more of those different versions of things when we go down the hall.
Okay, amazing. So do you want to head to the next room?
Yeah, I'm going to show you some of our classroom spaces. So when you're a student here at University of New England, or I'll show you where you'll be learning some of the different techniques and about some of the different critters and the biology. And then you come into these other research spaces to apply what you've learned in the classroom. So let's go look at a classroom.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so let's make sure we can hear ourselves here. All right, so this is a classroom, you said. What do people do in this room usually?
This room, we're learning about the biology of different marine organisms. And so you can see the tables are arranged such that they're in groups, so you can work collaboratively with your peers and have conversations. Depending on what we're learning, maybe there'll be microscopes set up on the table, or maybe over here we have a bunch of live tables. So there's flow through seawater here with different animals and critters in it. And so maybe we'll take some of these critters out and put them in small buckets on the tables to investigate.
So you said flow through right now. Is that a scientific term? What exactly are we talking about when we refer to something being a flow through system?
That's a great question. So this building is located very close to the Saco River and Saco Bay. And at every tide cycle, we're pumping water from the ocean into a big holding tank that's outside in our parking lot. And then that seawater flows through all of these gray pipes that you can see into these spaces. So the organisms in these tables right here are in raw seawater that's been pumped in from the ocean. And it fills the tank and then slowly drains out of the tank. And so there's always fresh water coming in. Here, I can show you. Okay. Oh, that one's off. There, from these great pipes, there's always water flowing in. And then the short pipes here, there's always water flowing back out.
So each of these systems is like a mini ocean then, where you could do little experiments and stuff.
Yes, or hold big slimy moon snails.
Oh,
that
wow.
are-
That's so cool.
So,
oh my God.
Oh, look at, he's gonna suck into his shell right now. Look at all that water that he's pushing out of his shell so he can fit his big fat foot into his shell.
That's amazing.
So that's exactly why we have these tables here, so our students can come and get curious and investigate these different organisms.
Amazing. That's awesome. Okay. So could we see maybe a couple more of the lab spaces where you do more of your research?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm gonna grab this piece of seaweed right here, because we're gonna talk about this one in a little
Ooh,
minute.
all right.
Nice leafy green, so I'm gonna take this with us.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Carrie. This is so cool. So I think this is another teaching lab, right? This room?
Yes, this is another lab, just like you saw. We have two of these spaces.
Okay. And is this more of a dry lab where the last one was a wet lab?
Yeah, you can see there's less gray pipes coming down from the ceiling. So we do, more, like chemical type labs or, things that don't need the running seawater.
Awesome. Okay. Very cool. So Carrie, I have a question before we keep going. So how many labs are in this building here?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. Well, there's the two teaching rooms, and then we have another dry classroom upstairs in here. So that's 4 rooms that we use for teaching and classroom settings. And then we probably have about a dozen really small lab spaces, like the first one that I showed you. Each one's a little bit different with slightly different equipment in it, depending on what that scientist wants to investigate or what their expertise is.
Wow, that's so cool. So there's so much research going on just in this building alone.
Yes, Maya, there's a whole lot happening in
Wow.
the building.
That's
an exciting
cool.
place to work.
So you don't need to have like huge big spaces in order to do scientific research all the time. Sometimes you have smaller spaces.
Yeah, I bet that room we were just in is smaller than most of your bedrooms at home, right?
Yeah.
It's a pretty small room there. Pack a lot on.
Yeah.
Yep. We also, the part that you're not going to see today, unfortunately, is we also have boats and an island. And so a lot of times our science and our learning happens outside of this building on the water.
Yeah. So yesterday, if you came with us to our Meet the Farmer webinar, you got to see us out on a boat on the water. So UNE actually has an aquaculture farm where they get to do a lot of their research, right?
That's right. Yes.
That's so cool.
We have a farm right here in Saco Bay. It just takes us a few minutes to drive the boat over to it.
Very cool. Awesome. All right, let's head to the next lab.
Oh, look at this, one of my students.
Oh,
Matthew. Would you like to say hello to a bunch of students on Zoom right now?
Sure. Hi guys, Matt. I'm in Dr. Byron's lab working on algae, specifically with gulls. So this red algae here, looking at how to improve spore growth. So basically, how to get the seeds to make some little baby gulls.
little dulse babies. Wow, this is a gorgeous seaweed. So this is one of 3 different types because we have red seaweed and then we have brown and we have green, right? So this is this a red one?
Yep, this is the red one. They don't always look red. There's a lot of different species of red algae. Not all of them are this brightly red.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. And then, so what is this really cool system that you've got here to keep it alive?
Yeah, so this is a bioreactor or a tumbling tank. This is how we grow gulls in a closed system. So it circulates through here. This here keeps the temperature constant. We add nutrients every week, and then the lights here give them all that they need to grow pretty quickly.
Okay. And that's because they're photosynthetic, right? So
Exactly.
they need the light. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, no problem.
Great to see you. All right, let's head to the next lab. Okay. So what's this one?
So there's a lot that happens in this small space. This is Sophia Tierman, another student of mine. And she can show you the species of algae that she works with.
Yeah, so I work with sea lettuce, this green guy, you've probably seen a bunch in the intertidal. So I was looking at different environmental factors, so things like water temperature, salinity, those types of factors and how it influences its reproduction, which is really relevant for our aquaculture farmers to be able to grow this critter.
Awesome. That's so cool. And I see we have some microscopes here too. So what are we looking at on some of these microscopes? Looks like they're a little bit out of focus. But
This is some of that, the dulse that you just saw Matthew holding. All right, so he will often put a blade of this algae under the microscope and look at it releasing its spores. Emily, there's a slide prepared that shows that demonstrates that really well in the slide deck.
oh yeah,
You got that?
great. Yes.
Oh, good. So you can see on your screens, I hope, right, a blade of that red dulse, and you can see how like the color in that blade is a little spotty and mottled. Parts of that blade have released their spores into the water, and then you can see what those spores look like on a microscope. And I think we have some here too, slightly out of focus it looks like. Let's see if I can get them into focus a bit more. So you can see those round spots are the spores here we have on this other microscope.
Oh, that's so cool. So I'm gonna have some questions for you in just a second about what spores are and what that kind of how that research is happening here. Amazing. And is this, I see here a photo that looks like some cells. Are these cells of seaweed?
All right, so we should have Sophia explain this one. This is really came out of Sophia's work, looking at the cellular structure.
So this is the different cellular structure of this critter right here, the sea lettuce. So it does different stages within its cells to prepare for reproduction, which occurs via broadcast spawning, meaning it releases its gametes into the water. So to prepare for reproduction, it first is just growing, and then its cells slowly prepare for it. This is right before it will release its spores into the water. This is right after. So these are just its cellular reproductive stages.
Amazing. Thank you. That's so cool. It's hard to believe that that is what we're seeing inside of this, but it's just magnified.
Yeah, fun fact about sea lettuce, it's only 2 cells thick, so it's really, really thin.
Oh my gosh. How does it keep from ripping if it's only 2 cells?
It actually can also reproduce asexually with blade fragmentation, so when little pieces rip off, it can keep growing. So that's why you see it like tumbling in the waves a lot.
Okay. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Wow, I learn everything new every time I come to science talks. This is so cool. Thank you. All right, so I have some more questions for Dr. Byron now. So
Should we back up and explain a little bit about the seaweed life cycle and
yeah,
what the
I would,
spore is?
I think that would be great. So you said that
Why we care?
yeah, so we just talked a lot about the research that your students are doing, and it sounds like they're doing a lot of research on life cycles. So let's start out basic. Like, what is a life cycle? Like, what are we talking about with that?
Well, I'm going to back up even more and say, like, why do we even want to look at this, right? So,
Yeah, for sure.
both Matthew and Sophia are doing their graduate studies with us, earning a master's degree. And they're doing similar things, but in different species. So you notice Sophia's seaweed was a bright green color. And sea lettuce, in that species was a nice red color. That's the dulse. And both of these species are really interesting in terms of the properties, the characteristics they have for us humans. So thinking about things that we like to eat and our nutrition, they're very high in protein. That dulse has a really nice flavor profile, just like bacony and soupy. Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely. But we don't know how to farm either of these species really well right now. So we're dependent on wild harvest and just taking from the wild. And I can tell you that the demand for especially that red seaweed, that dulse, because it tastes so good, is higher than we're able to supply just from wild harvest. So there's a lot of motivation to learn how to farm these species, how to farm these species in the ocean. Yeah. And seaweed's a tricky thing. Like, you don't want it to float away from you if you're trying to keep it on your farm. So we have to train it to attach to a rope so that it stays where we want it to stay. Okay. And in order to do that, in order to trick it and to train it to settle on a rope, we need to understand its biology and its life cycle. Gotcha. Because once it's in this adult form that you see the big blades, right? You can hold the beaker. Once it looks like this and a big blade, it's easy to find in the ocean floating around, but it's not going to attach to a rope for you. You have to do that at the really, really early life stage. Okay, so it's kind of like planting a seed in a pot, right? You got it. Okay. Right? So if any of you keep a garden in your backyard, right, this time of year, you're putting seeds in the soil, and then they grow up into the big leafy greens, right? Or whatever vegetable you're trying to grow. So we need to convince the adults, or release its seeds, which we call spores. Okay. And then we have to make sure those spores are happy enough that they survive. Okay. And then oh my gosh, okay, more. We have to trick them into settling on the rope so they don't float away from us. Awesome. It doesn't sound that hard, but I take it if we're using all of these labs to figure out how to do it, it might be a little bit hard. Yeah, well, the thing is that seaweed has really complicated life cycles. Okay, so back to our life cycle question. So when we're talking about a life cycle, we're talking about an organism that reproduces and then grows up to an adult stage where it can reproduce again, right? You got it. Okay, so I think we have a slide showing some types of reproduction and life cycle where the baby looks a lot like the adult. So Emily, could you put that up for us? I think it's the one that has the moose. There we go. Yeah, thank you. So not all babies can look like the adults. Right. You would recognize a human baby if you saw it, right? Yeah. I mean, it looks like a small, fat, miniature, chubby version of us. Of us. Full grown, teenagers and adults, right? Yeah. So something like a lot of mammals would have that type of lifestyle. Okay, but then there are other things that don't do that? There are all sorts of things that live in the ocean, primarily invertebrates, right? That don't look anything like the adult form when they're born. They hatch. So I think we have another slide right after that last one where we have some photos of different
life cycles. So yeah, so things like barnacles.
Right. Would you recognize that little nauplius there as a barnacle while it was swimming around in the ocean?
I definitely
Probably not, right? It's got like kind of looks like little fuzzy arms, right?
Yeah.
So when baby barnacles are born, they look like that and they float around in the water. And then at some point they're like, okay, I need to become an adult now. I should go find a rock to settle on.
Okay.
And so they swim down and they look for clues, particularly are there other barnacles nearby?
Yeah.
And then they secrete some cement from their head
Oh my
and
gosh.
glue themselves to the rock, and
Yeah.
that's where they're gonna live the rest of their life.
Wow, the life of a barnacle.
I know, right? But
So
you
crazy.
know, if you're a curious naturalist or biologist out there with your net and your microscope looking at all these little things floating around in the water, you probably wouldn't recognize that as a baby barnacle.
You're right. I took it away. So something that people might be more familiar with would be like a pine tree and a pine cone, right?
Right.
So like a pine cone is like that young seed version of like the big organism.
Right. The pine
Okay.
cone is what's producing the spores
Okay.
that will then get blown out and
Yeah.
find the soil and then grow up into another large tree.
Yeah.
So actually that's a really great example because those pine trees also have a complicated life cycle like the
do.
seaweed.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Emily, could you go to the slide where we see the life cycle of the seaweed, and then maybe we can explain what is like, why is this so complicated? Like, what's going on with this one?
All right, so big word, right? We have what's called alternation of generations here. So you can see both the sporophyte and the gametophyte look the same. They're both adult versions, right? But they do different things. They produce different types of spores or reproductive bodies. So that sporophyte produces what's called a zoospore. And if you look really closely at your screen, you can see that there's like 4 little hairy things sticking off of it.
Mm,
Those are called flagella.
okay.
So I'm going to blow your mind even more here, right?
Okay, I'm ready.
These seeds can swim,
Oh my gosh. Okay.
right?
They're almost like they're mobile. They can actually
They're
move
mobile.
around in the ocean.
Yes, but I was just misleading because those zoospores actually aren't like the babies that we're after necessarily, right? They're going to form in the gametophytes. They're going to grow up, right? And then those gametophytes are
Yeah.
pointing to the picture that you're looking at over here, which is probably really confusing for our audience. The gametophytes then are what produce the gametes, and one's
Okay.
going to be male, one's going to be female.
Yeah.
And those are going to come together to produce the zygote.
Okay.
All right, and then that goes back into the sporophyte. So you can see there's several different stages where they look different. So that zoospore,
Yeah.
spore flagella, the gametes only have 2, right? Sophia,
Okay,
am I
so we
getting
can-
this right?
So we can
Right.
tell the difference.
So you can
between
tell the difference
those
based
two
on
stages.
the flagella they have, right?
Okay. Interesting.
I know. So this
Yeah.
makes it really tricky now. If you want those little gametes and the zoospores to settle on your rope so you can contain it, how do you?
Yeah, because we have to own it afterwards.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're swimming around. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's one of the challenges. If you go to the next slide, you can see Sophia there training these spores, right? So she's got her adult piece of sea lettuce that she stresses out a little bit to convince it to release all of its spores. And then you can see that green water in her bucket. Those are all the spores that have been released. That's why the water is green.
Okay.
Right. And then I don't know if the video will play, but that last panel there is looking under the microscope and you can actually see them swimming around with their flagella,
Mm-hmm.
little tiny dots.
Wow.
And so she was looking at, well, when do they release their spores and can we predict that? And
Mhm.
what kind of rope do they prefer to stick to?
So there's a lot of variables in this then.
There are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
And so yesterday we were out on Seaweed Farm and we saw kelp. So sea lettuce isn't the same as kelp.
different species. Kelp is a brown. So there's
Okay.
3 types of seaweeds. There's brown seaweeds, there's green seaweeds, and there's red
Okay.
seaweed.
Gotcha.
Right? So yesterday you saw a brown seaweed, and most of the brown seaweeds we call kelp.
Yeah.
And then the sea lettuce you're seeing now is a good example of a green.
Okay.
And then Matt's species, the dulse, is a red.
Amazing. All right. And so each one of these species has a different life cycle.
They have slightly different life cycles.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah.
So
you
it's
can't
more
just
complicated.
you study one, you have to
Okay.
study all of them. So if you go to the last, we saw the slide there of Matt's, we already saw that one of the red dulse releasing its spores.
Mhm.
Those spores don't have flagella.
Yeah.
They're really heavy and they sink down to the bottom.
Okay. So his are like the opposite of
Exactly.
Sophie's. The green
Right.
ones and the red ones are like opposite.
Right. Sophia's are
Oh my
swimming
God.
all over the place. You can't even count them on that microscope slide. You know how many you have. And then Matt's are heavy and they sink.
Okay.
Right? Which is kind of crazy to think about. These are growing out in the intertidal. We've got waves coming in and crashing on the rocks, and they're perfectly happy out there. That's
Yeah.
where they want to be.
Okay.
How are these spores not getting like swept away into the ocean? Right? Somehow they're settling onto that rock, sticking to that rock,
Mhm.
and then growing up into their adult forms.
Wow. That's amazing. So it sounds like as a scientist, you kind of have to think about all of these different systems interacting together. Is that the base of ecology?
That's it.
Okay.
That's why I love what I do. I'm
Yeah.
not an expert on any one species. I like looking at the interactions of species
Mm.
in their environment. What's the temperature? How much oxygen is there? What are the nutrients?
Yeah.
How are all these things impacting this organism to be successful or not be successful?
For sure. Okay, so we talked a little bit, you introduced the idea that seaweeds are important, this research, because we're trying to grow them. But what are some of the things that we see these seaweeds doing in their environment?
Oh, that's a great question. So a lot of seaweeds are what we call foundational species, meaning that not only are they their own thing, right? They're their own plant or animal or seaweed,
Mhm.
but foundational species also provide habitats, a place to live for other organisms.
Okay.
So the seaweed, when it's underwater, right, which is where it is, right, underwater, and it's kind of flowed up through the water column. So it's attached to the rock on the bottom and it extends up into the water column. That's nice shelter for things to hide in.
Yeah.
All right. So you think about like baby fish or baby crabs, like they like to hide in there so they don't get eaten by larger things. So it's really good habitat and really important habitat for our coastal marine ecosystems.
Okay. That's awesome. So do things eat seaweed too, or is it not as commonly eaten by these organisms?
Oh, I can tell you, sea urchins love to chow down on particularly the kelp. Yep.
On the kelp.
Yep. And we often find little snails on the other species too, just grazing. Even if they're not eating the seaweed directly, they'll eat the sort of the bacterial film that lives on the top part of the seaweed, and they'll just little snails will graze on that.
Yeah. So when you're coming up with research questions, what's your process for figuring out what you want to research? How do you go about doing it?
You know what really motivates me, Maya?
What?
I love working with farmers.
You like
right?
the farmers.
I love
okay,
it.
so like who we met yesterday.
Exactly. So my secret is I kind of want to be a farmer.
Gotcha.
So how can I help the farmers as a scientist?
Mhm.
Right. And so I steal my questions from them.
Okay. So,
What does the farmer need to know to be successful?
yeah.
And then how can I help? How can I generate new knowledge? How can I make new discoveries that are going to help those farmers?
So when you're talking to these farmers, do they like really understand all of these interactions between the ecosystems?
They're witnessing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they are out there in the ocean way more than I get to be.
Yeah.
Sophia and Matt get to go out a lot. So they're witnessing these interactions and these changes that are happening in the environment. So they see them and they're aware of them. Absolutely.
Gotcha. So they're almost kind of scientists themselves, even though they're also farmers.
I would, yes, absolutely. But
Okay.
they might not have a microscope on their boat.
Yeah.
So, you know, they
So
might
you get
use
to
that.
collaborate so they can come and look at stuff here, and then you can go and look at stuff there.
You got it.
Okay, that's very cool. How are we doing on time? 5 more minutes? 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, so I do want to just mention, anybody who's on Zoom right now, if you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, we're going to take questions starting now. So I'm just going to double check. I have my computer right here to check and see if any questions have come up. Looks like we do have a lot of questions. So I'm just going to look at these real quick.
You want to put some lab coats on while we
I
answer
do.
questions?
So how often do scientists get to wear lab coats?
Well, you know, it's important to wear a lab coat if you're working with chemicals or anything that might like damage your skin or your clothing. But I tend to work with just the critters themselves, and you know, I don't care if I get a little seaweed slime on me. So, but this is really just for protection of your own clothes and your own
I think
skin.
it's for fashion.
Yeah, or fashion, you know.
Yeah, we have to make sure people know we're scientists.
They make us look smarter.
I think they make us look smarter. Yeah, I think we'll be able to answer the questions now. Okay, I'm gonna pull up some questions and try not to stare at my own face on the Zoom screen. So actually this will help. All right, so they're from Washington Academy. So that's in Machias. We have a question about, is there a seaweed species that releases its spores better than others in a classroom or a lab?
Oh, in a classroom or a lab.
Yeah.
I would say that the sea lettuce, the green one, has done a better job in the lab than the red dulse has.
Okay, so the green one does well.
Yeah.
What about like our kelps that we saw maybe on the field trip yesterday?
Yeah, we know how to trick them too because we've been working with them for a few years. In fact, right here, these are our nursery tanks for our kelp for our farms out there. They're empty right now, but the fall is the season that these are used. And here I can show you, we have some of our string. So we take, you can see all the PVC pipes up here ready to go for next season. So we'll take a long piece of PVC. This is just a short piece for demonstration, but we wrap it with the kite string. And this is what we want to trick our baby seaweeds to sticking to.
Okay.
Right. And so these sit in here full of seawater at a controlled temperature. Right.
Okay.
And we have to give them nutrients and keep them happy at their temperature for about 6 weeks in here in the nursery before there's enough growth on these kite strings that we can then take this out into the ocean. And then we end up wrapping this little thin string around a bigger, more sturdy rope. And that's how we get it to stay in the ocean. That rope's, of course, attached to anchors and floats, so we can stay put and we can find it.
So farming seaweed is actually like a 2-stage process. You have a lab process,
That's right.
and then you have an outside farm process.
That's right. And a
Okay.
lot of the commercial farmers, a lot of the farmers that are doing this for business, they rely on somebody else to provide them with the baby seaweed.
Okay.
So, so they do need to work with either a research lab or a other type of a nursery, like a commercial nursery, provide the.
Yeah, gotcha. I think, Emily, we may have a slide actually that shows what this tank looks like when it's full of these little spools, the kelp spools, if you want to show.
Yeah, there you go. So
Yeah,
that's
thank
this
you.
exact tank, and that's what it looks like in the fall. You can see we wrapped lights around it to keep it happy and nice controlled temperature, and we'll pour some fertilizer nutrients in there to help it grow.
Okay.
And you can see that string doesn't look white anymore. It's starting to look like a brown fuzz, right?
Okay.
And those are
the baby
those are the
seaweeds.
baby seaweeds.
Oh my
Right.
gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah. When we take it, what's really cool is when we harvest this time of year, you saw on the boat yesterday, the blades are longer than I'm tall.
Yeah.
So it goes from something you can't even see without a microscope to, you know, taller than we are in just one winter season.
How
All
fast?
that happens between November and April.
Oh my gosh. How do you think you could like Are there any seaweed species that you could like watch grow? Maybe if you sped it
Right.
up.
Exactly.
A time-lapse video,
There you
yeah.
go. That's
But
the
they
winner.
they grow much faster than a lot of other organisms
That's
do. That's so it's amazing. So I'm seeing another question here from Ms. Howard's classroom. I'm not sure where they are located, but if they want to put it in the chat, feel free. But Levy wanted to know, what kind of boat are you using to do all the research on? Do you have like a research vessel? Do you use small boats? Combinations?
We actually have a couple different vessels here at UNE, but you don't need a very large boat to do this work.
Okay.
What's important is that you're able to safely lean over the side and be
Okay.
able to handle your lines, your rope
Yeah.
in the water. And so sometimes the smaller boat that's like closer to the surface of the water is actually easier to work from than a really large boat.
Gotcha.
All of our farms here in Maine are really small scale, sort of family operations.
Yeah.
So that's why all of our equipment and our gear and our boats are pretty small.
Okay.
In fact, most of our seaweed farmers in the state are lobstermen, and they already have a boat. They have their
Oh.
lobster boat, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of farmers will just use their lobster boat.
Gotcha. So it's kind of multiple ways of making money on the water.
You got
not
it.
just one.
Right, because when do we
Okay.
use the lobsters?
In the summer.
In the summer. And when does seaweed grow?
Okay. In the
In the
winter.
winter.
Why does seaweed grow so well in the winter?
Oh, that's a great question. It will still grow in the summer, but so does everything else.
Oh, okay.
So that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
We grow when we farm seaweed in the ocean, we're farming it relatively close to the surface
Okay.
so that it still gets a lot of sunlight,
Yeah.
right? It's just like plants, it's a photosynthetic organism. It needs that energy from the sunlight to make its sugars and to grow through photosynthesis. So we want to keep it up in the water column so it gets enough light,
Yeah.
right? And especially in the winter when there's just less light altogether.
Yeah.
And we found that if we keep that seaweed in the water into the summer,
Mm-hmm.
everything else starts growing on it.
Oh,
Right? And
okay.
it doesn't do very well. The seaweed itself does not like the warmer temperatures.
Okay.
Its biology is designed to operate best at colder temperatures.
Interesting. So
And
kind of opposite from a lot of things that we think about. They grow well in the summer.
exactly. So, and then everything else, right, is growing fast in the summertime, and it wants surface, it wants something to grab onto. A lot of our organisms in the ocean, like in their adult form, like that barnacle we talked about, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna land and stay put. So
Okay.
a lot of those types of organisms in the ocean that just stay in one place through its adult form need to find somewhere to settle, somewhere to land, and they might start landing on that seaweed. So then it
Gotcha.
becomes called fouled
Foul. Okay.
with all these other organisms.
Mm-hmm.
So for two reasons, its growth rate slows down in the summer because it doesn't like the hot temperatures, and because everything else is trying to use it as a platform to grow on.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to try to farm these species, these cold water species in the summer.
Yeah.
Of course, there's other species of seaweed that live all around the world, including the tropics.
Okay.
And
So
they do-
those ones do really well.
Those are just fine. Yeah, they do great in the warm temperatures. So it's
Okay.
all about what the biology of that organism is designed to do well.
Gotcha.
We have cold water here in the Gulf of Maine.
Yes. Okay. That's so cool. All right. I think I'm gonna pull up another question. Ooh, Miss Howard's class is in Friendship, Maine. So that's where they're coming from. So actually another student from Miss Howard's class is wondering, how does seaweed get its color?
Oh, these are such great questions.
Yeah.
How do other plants get its color too? Right? So it's plants and seaweed. And I should make this distinction right here. I've referenced plants a few times. Plants and seaweed are not the same type of organism.
Okay.
They have very different structures, right?
Okay.
So plants have a vascular system that helps transport water from the roots
Okay.
up into the blades of leaves, right? Seaweeds do not do that.
Yeah.
Remember, Sophia told you it's only 2 cells
Correct.
thick.
Yeah.
So seaweeds like this they can just absorb and sort of diffuse what they need right through their tissues. There's no vascular system
Okay.
in the seaweed at all.
So it's like with a tree, we have like a root and then a stem and then a leaf.
Right.
But in a seaweed, we just have the seaweed.
Yes. And we have what's called a holdfast, which you can't see on this specimen. It's broken off. But
Okay.
most seaweed have an anchoring system
Yeah.
that kind of can look like roots, but there's no vascular tissue in there. So nothing's getting transported. It's simply an anchor.
Okay. Gotcha.
Some seaweeds have big anchors, big holdfasts, and Ova has a little tiny one.
Yeah.
So they all do it a little bit differently. But I still have to answer the question about
The colors.
Yeah. Right? So plants and seaweed both have different pigments in their tissues,
Okay.
right?
Pigments.
And so chlorophyll is a very common one, which creates that green color that we see with our eyes. That
Mhm.
helps with that photosynthesis sort of machinery, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? And so these different seaweeds have different types of pigments in them
Okay.
to help capture that energy of the sunlight and perform photosynthesis.
Yeah.
And some of these seaweeds do better at deeper water depths
Okay.
than other ones based on the types of
Interesting.
pigments they have and what they're
Yeah.
specialized to do. How much
Gotcha.
light they need to get.
So kind of like when if you've ever hiked a mountain, we'll see like some trees at the bottom of the mountain, and then as we go up the mountain, we see different types of trees. Is that kind of similar to how we go deeper in the ocean and we see different types of seaweeds?
You do see different types of seaweeds as you go deeper in the ocean.
Okay.
And part of that might be because of their pigments.
Pigments.
And
Okay.
part of it might be other factors too.
Okay. So it's not just the pigments. The pigments kind of give it the color, but it doesn't always mean that they live deeper.
Correct.
So
Just
it's
like
all
everything.
ecology and complicated, is what you're telling me.
There's a lot of factors playing together.
Gotcha.
Like the red one that we saw
Mhm.
earlier, dulse, that does like to stay submerged under the water. It tends to be, you can still find it in the intertidal, but it tends to be lower intertidal, so it's often underwater.
Okay.
Whereas the ulva you might see floating around or getting tumbled a little bit closer to shore, so a little bit
Okay.
more sun. So those red seaweeds will do better in a little bit deeper water because of the types of pigments they have and
Mhm.
how those pigments are interacting with light.
Gotcha. I love ecology. It's so fun. All right. I think we're gonna have time for maybe two more questions.
All right.
Kind of quick questions. So, here, from Whale Camp. I don't know what Whale Camp
Oh, it
is,
sounds fun.
but it sounds fun. It says, from Whale Camp in the Bay of Fundy.
Oh,
Very
I really want to go now.
Yeah. So they're wondering, beyond food, what are some of the ways seaweed research contributes to technology and sustainable business practices moving into the future?
How does research contribute to business and technology?
Yeah. What are some other things other than the food applications of seaweed?
Oh, that's a another good. I love these questions. This is great. So I talked a little bit earlier about why we need to do the science we're doing in the lab in order to help the industry of farming the seaweed, right? And how that red seaweed, that dulse in particular, there's high demand because it tastes good, and the ulva the sea lettuce high in protein.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the reason, but there's additional applications for seaweed as well,
Okay.
such as if you eat ice cream, right? There's probably some carrageenan in there that comes from the red seaweeds. It's a thickening agent to give it more of like a creamy or gelatinous type texture.
Okay.
Seaweed extracts, things that like different, I guess, chemical compounds that we can pull out, extract from the seaweed,
Yeah.
can be used for pharmaceuticals, for drugs,
Okay.
or for skin and hair products.
Yeah. What about like plastics and stuff?
There's a lot of really new, exciting research being done on how we might be able to use seaweed to
Mhm.
make something that looks and acts like plastic,
but it
isn't plastic, right? So
Okay.
no oils, no fossil fuels were used to make
Wow.
that product, but it still does the same thing that plastic would do. Like think of saran wrap, you might wrap your food in, maybe you want
Yeah.
that nice thin film.
Yeah.
Or that kite string I just showed you.
Yeah.
Can we make that out of seaweed? So there's some real innovators in the state of Maine working on those those innovations and those challenges right now.
Sounds like some pretty important research.
Yes.
Okay. Very cool. All right. I think we have about 1 minute left to ask a final question here. And I saw that, I heard Whale Camp is a marine bio summer camp for kids. So shout out to Whale Camp. That's awesome. So our final question, Miss Howard's class, really, they did a great job. So what is your favorite part of your job? It's a great way to wrap up this.
Oh, that is a good question to wrap up. Oh, so I'm going to answer that in two ways, right? I love being a scientist. I love contributing to generating new knowledge and making new discoveries about things that we didn't know before.
Okay.
So that's very motivating.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I'm at a college, at a university.
Yeah.
And so the joy of working with my students and not just making these discoveries, but alongside them. So they're full of creative ideas. Yeah. And they work so hard, and it's very motivating to be able to work in that academic environment with the students doing the research. So it's really the combination of both of those.
That's so cool. It sounds like a dream job, actually.
I'm pretty lucky. Pretty lucky.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up our 45 minutes, but thank you so much to Dr. Byron for showing us all of these amazing lab spaces at the University of New England. Thanks to all of you who attended. I know there were a couple of questions we didn't get to, but I think your questions were fantastic. If you want to reach out to us, of course, we're happy to answer more questions offline. And thanks also to Sophie and Matt. They showed us their research, so that was great. So we'll see you all for our next virtual field trip next time we do it. But have a great rest of your Friday. All right. Bye, everybody.